So this is part 2 of our lecture on bronchial asthma and cough. Okay, in the live lecture we have already discussed the cough part of it, right? Let's talk about drugs for bronchial asthma. Now we have already spoken in detail about the mechanism of asthma. Okay, what happens in asthma? We spoke about how there is more reaction, more responsiveness of the tracheobronchial smooth muscles because of variety of stimuli, which leads to narrowing of the airway and more secretion is there. Edema becomes there's edema happening and there's mucus plugging, because of which the patient suffers from dyspnea, wheezing, cough, and that leads to a limitation of activity. Now we already have understood how it works, how asthma happens. The asthma that I spoke about is called as extrinsic asthma or atopic asthma. There's another type of asthma called as intrinsic asthma, which is more perennial, and status asthmaticus is more common in intrinsic asthma. Simple. Now the inflammation is because of mast cells, right? And the WBCs that come in, they are because of they are eosinophils, lymphocytes, and mast cells. So remember we spoke about release of mediator, histamine. Others include protease enzyme and TNF alpha. Then we have prostaglandins, platelet activating factor, but more important was leukotriene, plus a little extra is activation of certain genes, because of which interleukins and TNF alpha are formed even after the stimulus is gone. And all these mediators are causing edema, hyperemia, and production of viscous secretion. And remember we spoke about how this is a reversible airway obstruction, but if you don't take care, it will eventually become irreversible. Now keeping this in mind, we also spoke about how to prevent asthma from happening. First, avoid the antigen or hyposensitization. Then we spoke about IgE antibody, neutralization of IgE antibody by omalizumab. We spoke about how you can suppress the inflammation by corticosteroids, stabilize the mast cells, antagonize the various mediators, in which we are going to talk about leukotriene antagonists, and you can even give anticholinergic and sympathomimetic drugs which can dilate the bronchioles. Plus we also have directly acting bronchodilators such as methylxanthines. Now for all practical purposes, sympathomimetic drugs will not be discussed by me in this video. There's another video that is coming up later on where I will discuss in detail the contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles and the various drugs that we give. So I'm not going to discuss this topic in this video, sympathomimetic drugs. Also I'm not going to discuss anticholinergic, okay? Because to understand these drugs, we need to understand how smooth muscles contract and relax. For that matter, even methylxanthine would be slightly confusing, but if you know how smooth muscles work, it will be easier. Theophylline and its compound are used in asthma and COPD. Theophylline is actually methylated xanthine alkaloids, caffeine, theophylline, and theobromine. So these are the three important naturally occurring compounds that we have. It's in tea, coffee, and chocolates. Okay, all these three have similar actions, but let's say percentage wise the action will differ. Some will act more, some will act less. Let me give you some examples of the actions of theophylline. Caffeine, theophylline are stimulants. They act on higher centers and produce a sense of well-being, alertness. They beat boredom. fatigue goes away, thinking becomes clearer. um, See, after some time there will again be dullness, but still um, you know, you have to understand that these stimulate the brain, so it improves the performance of the person, increases motor activity. That's why tea and coffee is one of the most common addiction people have worldwide. Caffeine is more active than theophylline, so coffee is more stronger in producing these effects as compared to tea. Higher doses will cause nervousness, restlessness, panic, insomnia, and excitement, because the excitation will go to extreme levels. Even more than that, there will be tremors, delirium, and convulsions. Okay, but the side effects are much more common with theophylline. Okay, so the action is much more common by coffee, whereas the side effects are much more common by tea. You need to remember this. You can even stimulate the medullary, vagal, respiratory, and vasomotor centers, and that's the reason why when too much of tea or coffee goes, and then there is gastric irritation and chemoreceptor trigger zone, it's the center for vomiting. When that is stimulated, you get nausea and vomiting. Tea, coffee also work on cardiovascular system. They directly stimulate the heart, they increase the force of contraction, so heart rate increases. But they also stimulate vagus nerve, right? So it might decrease also. See, the action is variable, you can't really predict what is going to happen. But tachycardia is more common with theophylline, and caffeine usually lowers the heart rate by acting on the vagus nerve. Overall, cardiac output increases, cardiac work is increased, even arrhythmia can happen, so you have to be very, very careful. Methylxanthines, especially theophylline, can dilate blood vessels. So, peripheral resistance decreases, but they contract the blood vessels in the brain. Okay, that's the reason why coffee is such a good thing to be taken by a patient suffering from migraine. So effect is variable. It causes dilatation also, it causes constriction also. So it depends. Vasomotor center and direct cardiac stimulation will raise the blood pressure. Vagal stimulation and vasodilatation will lower the blood pressure. So what we noticed is usually it causes rise in systolic and fall in diastolic blood pressure. All smooth muscle relax, but most often we are talking about bronchial smooth muscle, especially in asthmatics and COPD cases. Beautiful, it dilates the bronchi very nicely. Theophylline is much more potent as compared to caffeine. So dose related bronchodilation happens. Okay, of course not as good as beta 2 agonist, but still it works, and it increases the capacity of the lung, vital capacity of the lungs. Even biliary spasm is relieved. Kidneys, methylxanthines are diuretics. They inhibit tubular reabsorption of sodium and water. They increase blood flow, they increase GFR. So if you drink too much tea and coffee, then there will be diuresis. Skeletal muscle, actually caffeine causes increase in contractile power of skeletal muscle. How does that happen? It increases release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and remember this, calcium is important for contraction of muscles, all muscles, cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, skeletal muscle. They will contract when there is calcium. Clear? If you give too much, there will be contracture. So be careful. In addition to this, caffeine actually enhances acetylcholine release. That's the reason why after having a cup of coffee, you feel like you can work better. Even diaphragm works better, especially with theophylline. Diaphragmatic contractility is increased very nicely. So what happens is breathing becomes better, and that's the reason why theophylline is so very beneficial for dyspnea and COPD. Both these compounds enhance secretion of acid and pepsin, and that's the reason why acidity and peptic ulcers can happen. caffeine can increase BMR. Even theophylline can do that. So the heat production increases. This is partly because of release of catecholamines. Catecholamines are adrenaline, noradrenaline. Mast cells, inflammatory cells, the release of inflammatory mediators decreases. So this also helps in bronchial asthma and COPD. So how do they work? 3 actions have been found. First, they release calcium into the muscles, especially cardiac and skeletal muscle. That's the reason why it contracts better. They inhibit phosphodiesterase. Phosphodiesterase is an enzyme that breaks cyclic AMP. Now, if you inhibit the enzyme that breaks cyclic AMP, then the concentration of cyclic AMP and cyclic GMP increases, and that causes bronchodilation. That causes cardiac stimulation, that causes vasodilatation, and that mediator release is inhibited when the cyclic AMP level increases. The third mechanism is blockade of adenosine receptor. Adenosine is a local mediator in CNS, CVS and other organs. So adenosine can actually contract smooth muscles, especially the bronchial smooth muscles. It can dilate the cerebral blood vessel. That can cause migraine. It depresses cardiac pacemaker and inhibits gastric secretion. So when you give methylxanthines, there will be relaxation of smooth muscles, especially the bronchial smooth muscle. There will be contraction of cerebral blood vessels, because of which migraine will stop, and it will enhance cardiac pacemaker. So the heart rate will go up. Action A is at high concentration. B and C, normal concentration. Simple. That's how it works. Easy to understand. Now that we are clear with the overall actions of methylxanthines, let us have a quick look at the drugs. Theophylline. Pharmacokinetics means what happens to the drug once it comes into the body. See, whatever the drug does to the body is called as pharmacodynamics. Okay, and whatever the body does to the drug is pharmacokinetics. So this will include absorption and distribution. So kinetics we are discussing. It is very well absorbed orally. Even rectally it can be given as in the form of suppositories, but it's a non-consistent, erratic absorption. It goes in all the tissue. It crosses placenta. It is secreted in milk. And that's the reason why you don't give this to pregnant women. You have to be very, very careful. Okay. Now you don't really have to do all the pharmacokinetics because it's unnecessary from CCMP perspective, even from clinical perspective. Not very important. Only whatever I'm telling you, remember that. Okay. Therapeutic concentration, the T half, the time in which the concentration of the drug becomes half in the plasma is called as T half, is around 7 to 12 hours. But children actually eliminate the medicine much faster, and elderly people will do it slower. Now the next thing that you have to remember is that the higher the dose you give, the more the T half will be. So you have to keep in mind that the way in which the body metabolizes theophylline will change based on the person and based on the concentration of the medicine you are giving. So they have given you certain factors with which you need to multiply the dosage to get the correct value. So whatever is the full adult dose, if your patient is more than 60 years of age, you multiply that full dose by 0.6, you will get the dose for the 60-year-old person. If the patient has congestive heart failure, it is whatever is the adult dose into 0.6. If the patient has pneumonia, it is into 0.4, and if the patient has liver failure, then you can multiply it based on liver failure 0.2 to 0.4. The problem is theophylline has a very narrow safety margin. It means that at the level of drug where you get therapeutic effects, let's call it therapeutic concentration range, at the upper part of therapeutic concentration range, toxicity starts. GIT toxicity, CNS toxicity, CVS toxicity like headache, nervousness, nausea will happen. Gastric pain will happen. Even rectal inflammation will happen if you give suppositories. Pain at the site of IM injection. If you give too fast IV injection, it will cause chest pain, precordial pain, syncope, even sudden death can happen because of sudden fall in BP, arrhythmias or asystole. So see, they have given you a nice beautiful diagram. Therapeutic range is this much only. The higher you go on the plasma concentration, the more the toxicity would be. So be very careful in how much you are giving this dose. Please do not touch interactions. This is not at all important as of now. Okay, when the time is correct, we'll talk about it. Where do you use it? Well, we use it for bronchial asthma and COPD. It causes bronchodilation, right? It also decreases the release of inflammatory mediators, so it must be helping in that way also. It improves mucociliary clearance, plus it acts on the brain. The respiratory drive gets stronger and the patient can breathe better. Actually, even the diaphragmatic contractility improves. But remember, we spoke about how there is poor tolerability, narrow safety margin, low efficacy, variations between one person and another, which is the reason why many people don't like using this medicine. Okay, many doctors now recommend sustained release theophylline in mild to moderately severe asthma as an adjunct, as an additional medication, not as a primary medication at all. Okay, it can even be used for patients who have nocturnal asthma, like they have to get up because of asthma in the night. This drug is more useful in COPD as a combination, like you have to give something else also. Intravenous aminophylline is once upon a time used for status asthmaticus. Nowadays nobody uses it. Apnea in premature infants, like sometimes the baby does not breathe, so theophylline can reduce the duration of these apnea episodes, which sometimes happen in preterm infants in the first few weeks of life. You give oral or IV treatment for 1 to 3 weeks. Theophylline will work wonderful. Caffeine is equally effective. As I have already mentioned, anticholinergic drugs will be discussed somewhere else, so I am not going to waste your time doing this. Let's talk about leukotriene antagonist. Now, if you recall, when we spoke about the various chemical mediators that are released by mast cell, one of the most important was leukotriene or cysteine leukotriene C4 and D4. They are not just produced by mast cell, they are also produced by macrophages, eosinophils and other inflammatory cells. And apparently they are important mediators of bronchial asthma. So what pharma companies have done is they have developed two antagonists and a synthesis inhibitor. The antagonist will block the receptors on which leukotrienes work. Okay, the two cysteine leukotriene 1 receptor blockers or antagonists are montelukast and zafirlukast, and now they are used very frequently in management of asthma. Both of them have same action, same clinical use. Once you give them, it will enter into the body of the patient and they will competitively antagonizes block the action of cysteine leukotriene 1 C4 and D4. As a result, because see, if leukotriene cannot attach to its receptor, then there cannot be bronchoconstriction, there cannot be excess airway secretion, there cannot be increased vascular permeability because of which there was edema, there cannot be recruitment of eosinophils, right? So what will happen instead? Even though leukotriene is there, it can't bind with the receptor, and that's the reason why this person will have bronchodilation instead of bronchoconstriction. There will be reduced sputum eosinophil count because eosinophils will not come only, no? There will be no inflammation, and overall suppression of bronchial inflammation, bronchial mucus production, and bronchial hyperactivity will be seen. Lung function improves. We have seen this happen. Okay, and the number of time a person might get asthma exacerbations is increased asthma attacks. So those attacks of asthma are reduced. Now remember, there are quite a lot of chemicals which are released during inflammation. Leukotriene is one of them. Okay, so what you need to remember is, some people will have leukotriene as the main chemical mediator of inflammation and asthma. Other asthmatics may not have leukotriene as the main mediator. So people who have leukotriene as the main mediator, if you give them montelukast or zafirlukast, they will not have inflammation, right? Na? They are called as responders. And people who do not have leukotriene as the main compound, main mediator of inflammation, when you give them montelukast and zafirlukast, will they respond to this medication? No. That's the reason why they are called as non-responders. Okay. So what you have to understand in this is, leukotriene as a chemical mediator of inflammation will have differing involvement in different individuals. Okay, simple, easy to understand. Great. Now you will definitely agree with what I'm trying to tell you here. There's no point in trying to block a mediator after it has attached to the receptor, right? Now, if you want to block a chemical mediator of inflammation, you should have blocked the receptor even before the chemical was released. What I am trying to say here is, if a person already has asthma attack, it means his leukotriene has already bound to the receptor, no? That's why there is reaction happening. If you want leukotrienes to be blocked, use montelukast and zafirlukast as a prophylactic therapy, not as a cure, right? So what you do is, you give it to a person before his asthma even starts, as an alternative to inhaled glucocorticoids. So what will happen, in case the pollen grain comes and in case the mast cell releases leukotriene, then there will be no reaction, right? Na? That is what we are trying to do. Efficacy is not that good, but they may actually reduce the need for inhaled steroid. So they are more acceptable in children. In severe asthma, you might use them to reduce dose of steroid, but not as the treatment again. So you add this to long-acting beta-2 agonist, so it works very nicely. So not for terminating an attack of asthma, only as prophylaxis. This is what you need to remember. There are some asthmas which are aspirin-induced asthmas, and sometimes some children have exercise-induced asthma. These antagonists work fantastic there, but not in case of COPD and all. So they're very safe drug, very little side effects like abdominal pain, headache or rash. Some eosinophilia and neuropathy are very infrequent combination, and very rarely we have something called as Church-Strauss syndrome, which is vasculitis eosinophilia, but very little. Very good drugs, you can give them even to small children. Simple enough, clear. There's another drug called as Xylutone, very restricted use because it is short acting and it has a hepatotoxic or liver damaging potential. But this was an enzyme inhibitor. It was to block the enzyme 5-LOX lipoxygenase. That's the name of the enzyme. 5 LOX. So it blocks the production of leukotriene synthesis. Is stop. So good, na? You block the enzyme that does not allow leukotrienes to be formed. How will they work? Easy. But because of the side effects, as I said, they are not really. Xyludon is not really a great drug. Then we have mast cell stabilizers, synthetic chromone derivative called as sodium chromoglycate. Some people write it as chromolan sodium. It inhibits the degranulation of mast cells and other inflammatory cells also. Okay, so the release of mediators is limited. Now, how it works, we don't know. Okay, even you don't have to really worry about how it works. It actually delays the chloride channel in the membrane of these cells. Oh, okay. Long-term treatment decreases the inflammatory response, the hyperreactivity decreases, bronchospasm is attenuated, means decreases. So it's not a bronchodilator, it does not antagonize histamine, acetylcholine, leukotriene, no. So it does not work during an attack of asthma, it only stops an asthma attack from happening. So you have to give it as an aerosol through the metered dose inhaler, which is like basically a pump. And in bronchial asthma, as a prophylactic in mild to moderate asthma, it works very nicely. So it decreases the frequency of attacks. It reduces the chances of extrinsic and exercise-induced asthma. It takes time to work. Almost like you need to give it for 2 to 4 weeks before you start seeing the action. But even after stopping the medicine, the action will last for 1 to 2 weeks. So this is how it works. Apart from this, doctors have tried it in allergic rhinitis as a nasal spray, regular 4-time nasal spray, reduces symptoms. Okay, so it kind of symptomatic improvement. We have also seen as the eye drops, it is good in allergic conjunctivitis. So it's beneficial there. Simple. So these are the things that you need to remember. Of course, there will be side effects such as negligible oral absorption and bronchospasm sometimes happen because these are available as rotahalers. So from that fine powder inhalation, some people have actually got bronchospasm. But we also have inhalers nowadays, so that does not work that way. Another mast cell stabilizer actually is an H1 antihistaminic. H1 is the name of the receptor. H1 histamine receptor number 1. Ketotifen blocks the H1 receptors, actually speaking, but it does have some additional chromoglycate-like action. So the WBCs, the mast cells, macrophage, lymphocyte, neutrophils, their activation and their mediator release is reduced. Okay, now it does not work 100% the way we want. We have tried it in many other allergic disorders, but because it's in syllabus, you need to know them. Okay, corticosteroids are not to be done from this chapter, though you need to know why we give them, but don't waste your time in trying to learn everything from here, because there's another chapter on corticosteroids that we are going to do in set number 2 of our chapters. Omalizumab, as I said, it's good for you to know the name, but we are never going to use them. They are anti-IgE antibodies, and they are administered by subcutaneous injections. They neutralize all the IgE in circulation. So what happens is, when the next time antigen comes, very little IgE is available. So the mediator release is very minimal. So instead of bronchoconstriction, hardly anything happens. But no benefit in non-allergic asthma, no benefit, in mild cases. Only in severe asthma, omalizumab might work, fantastic. So why give drugs that don't work, right? This entire paragraph, inhaled asthma medication, is to try and explain to you the various ways in which asthma medicines have changed. From tablets, we have come to metered dose inhalers, to nebulizers, to spinhalers and rotahalers. So they are just giving you how things worked, how things were delivered. So you can read it if you want. The thing that I want you to do perfectly is the choice of treatment of asthma. See, remember, asthma severity will change. It can be as minor as hardly having a respiratory difficulty to something really incapacitating breathlessness. The idea is, when you're treating your patient, relieve him of the current symptoms. Second, don't allow asthma attack to happen again. And third, try to minimize emergency hospitalization. So, there is a British Thoracic Society, there is a National Asthma Education and Preventive Program which is run by many countries, and there's also a worldwide initiative. It's called as Global Initiative Against Asthma, GINA. Okay, and these committees, these societies, they recommend some guidelines and we follow those guidelines. The guideline is very simple. You start with the dose that is necessary. Okay, and once the asthma is under control for 3 to 6 months, you should try and reduce the medicines in a stepwise manner. So this is how they talk about it. A mild asthma means a person whose symptoms are less than once in a day. So maybe in a week's time he is getting 3 or 4 attacks of asthma, not daily. And the person is absolutely normal between the attacks. In such a case, you have to only prescribe short-acting beta-2 agonist. Now, what are short-acting beta-2 agonists? They are drugs that relax the smooth muscles of the bronchi. Remember, I told you I will be discussing beta blockers, beta agonist, not blockers, beta agonist, and acetylcholine blockers, anticholinesterase, in some other video. Okay, so you don't worry about the mechanism of action right now. Just remember that beta-2 agonists are going to relax the bronchial smooth muscle. So you give them as a an SOS drug whenever required. Like the moment the patient starts getting asthma attack, give it. Okay, the patient takes a puff or two and he's done. This is step 1. There are some people who have seasonal asthma, where we can predict what is going to happen. So patient might come to your clinic and say, doctor, I have asthma in January, February, March. So what you can do is to start a regular low dose of inhaled, ICS is inhaled corticosteroids 3 to 4 weeks before the expected attack. So in December only you start as this inhaled corticosteroid and continue for 3 to 4 weeks after the season is over. So if the patient is saying January, February, March, you give the inhaled corticosteroid from December to April. If you don't want to give steroids, you can try montelukast or zafirlukast. Especially in children, we don't want to give them steroids because steroids have a lot of side effects. You can try montelukast and zafirlukast. But along with this prophylactic therapy, you will also give beta-2 agonist. Let's call them SABA, short-acting beta agonist. So you give them SABA, short-acting beta agonist, as and when needed. So you explain to the parents, see, I'm giving you montelukast or zafirlukast. Chances are your child will not have asthma. In case he has, take the short-acting beta agonist. Then we have something called as persistent asthma with occasional exacerbation. Here, the patient has symptoms once a day and he does not become normal in between the attacks. He has subnormal ventilatory performance. So you give regular dose of ICS, just like step number 2, point number 2, but regularly. or you can try Montelukast, Zaferlukast, but you have to explain to the patient, see, it's 50-50, it may work, it may not work. Don't try theophylline and all, it is a less satisfactory option. Okay, but you also give SABA again, as and when needed. A person with moderate asthma means attack is so frequent that it is affecting his day-to-day activity. Attacks are happening more than 1 times per day, and or the patient has basal symptoms which are persistent. He is never normal. Here you start low dose of inhaled corticosteroids and you give LABA, long-acting beta agonist. Or you can even give medium dose inhaled corticosteroid alone. But you also have to tell that long-acting beta agonist is not a good idea in long run. So we will try to discontinue it if your asthma comes in control. You want to give leukotriene antagonist, you can try it in place of long-acting beta agonist. Okay, but there's no guarantee it will work. Plus, even though it's not mentioned here, let me tell you that you have to give short-acting beta agonist also. Tell the patient that in case, despite giving you low-dose inhaled corticosteroid plus long-acting beta 2 agonist, you still get an asthma attack, please use a short-acting beta agonist. Clear? Nowadays, we have sustained release theophylline tablets available. That can also be given, especially for people who are getting nighttime asthma. Severe asthma means the patient has continuous symptoms, activities are limited now, and the exacerbations are too frequent, he requires hospitalization. Here you will give high dose of inhaled corticosteroid through a spacer plus long-acting beta 2 agonist twice a day. Okay, plus one or more of the following: leukotriene antagonist, or a sustained release oral theophylline, or a sustained release oral beta 2 agonist, plus rescue treatment, which means in case he has an attack, he should have a short-acting beta agonist with him. Even though you are giving all this and patient is still not completely under control, then you give oral steroid therapy. See, till now everything was inhaled. Steroid was inhaled. So apart from LABAs and inhaled corticosteroids, you will start oral also. Okay. Remember, oral steroid will definitely 100% work. The problem is it has side effects. So stick to inhaled, but if you have to give oral, you will have to withdraw it. So attempt to withdraw should be made periodically. Okay, so that you are 100% sure the patient is not getting unnecessary steroids. Getting it? Very easy to understand. Then comes status epilepticus or refractory asthma. See, anybody can get it, especially like upper respiratory tract infection. If asthma patient gets, he will definitely get, or most likely get, status asthmaticus. Here, despite giving all the home treatments that we are giving here till point number 5, the patient is not responding. Now you admit the patient. Hydrocortisone hemisuccinate 100 mg or any other glucocorticoid should be given IV stat immediately. This should be followed by 100 to 200 mg 4 to 8 hourly infusion. Remember, steroids are long acting, but they act slowly. So you have to explain to the patient that it may take up to 6 hours to act. But till then the patient is having status asthmaticus, he is in asthma attack, he is not getting relief. You give nebulized salbutamol plus ipratropium bromide with oxygen. How do you give oxygen? High flow humidified oxygen. If this doesn't work, add salbutamol terbutaline. Salbutamol or terbutaline 0.4 mg IM or subcutaneous. Because many times what happens, the asthma attack is so severe, na, the nebulized salbutamol is not even reaching the correct place. The air is only not going in. If that also does not work, intubate and mechanical ventilation. You find out if the patient has respiratory tract infection and you treat it with intensive antibiotic therapy and correct any dehydration and acidosis. Dehydration should be corrected with saline and acidosis should be corrected by sodium bicarbonate or sodium lactate infusion. So there you have it. This is a very simple chapter. Go through this, let me know if there is any doubt. I will be more than happy to help you. Till the next time, this is Dr. Avinash signing off. Take care.